The pregnancy test showed 2 clear lines confirming what I had suspected for weeks. At 34, after 3 years of trying and 1 heartbreaking miscarriage, I was finally pregnant. My husband Greg's reaction wasn't what I expected. "This isn't good timing," he said, his voice flat as he stared at the positive test. No excitement, no joy, just a strange cold distance I'd never seen before. The moment should have been filled with celebration, with dreams of the future we'd planned, together. Instead, it marked the beginning of the end, or so I thought. What I didn't know then was that my late father's rarely discussed trust fund had a special clause for exactly this situation, a provision that would turn the tables in ways neither Greg nor I could have imagined. I had meticulously planned the perfect evening to share my news. Our apartment was filled with the aroma of Greg's favorite meal, honey glazed chicken with rosemary potatoes. I'd arranged candles across our dining table, dimmed the lights, and wrapped the positive test in a small blue box with a silver ribbon. For 3 years, we had tried everything, tracking ovulation cycles, fertility supplements, even considering medical interventions. Each negative test had been another small heartbreak. This positive result should have been our victory, our moment of triumph after years of disappointment. Before I continue with what happened next, I want to connect with you for a moment. I know many of you watching have faced unexpected betrayals or moments when life suddenly changed direction. Drop your location in the comments. I'd love to know where you're all watching from. And if this story resonates with you even a little, consider subscribing. Tomorrow, I'll share the emotional confrontation that changed everything, including details I've never spoken about publicly before. Greg barely touched his food that night. He checked his phone repeatedly, his attention clearly elsewhere. When I finally slid the small blue box across the table, he opened it with hesitation, as if already suspecting what was inside. "I'm pregnant," I whispered, tears of joy filling my eyes. His expression changed, not to happiness, but to something that looked remarkably like fear. "This isn't good timing," he repeated, setting the test down as if it might burn him. "We need to discuss this tomorrow. I have a lot on my mind with the Peterson account." I tried to mask the hurt his reaction caused. "I know your work has been stressful lately," I said, reaching for his hand across the table. "But we've been hoping for this for so long." He pulled away almost imperceptibly and checked his watch. "I need some air. Don't wait up." The front door closed behind him before I could respond. I sat alone in the flickering candlelight, trying to understand how our moment of joy had dissolved so quickly. My phone buzzed at 11:42 p.m. with a text from Greg. "Staying at Jake's tonight. Need to clear my head." The next morning, I woke to an empty bed, my hand instinctively moving to my still flat stomach. The apartment was silent, that peculiar kind of silence that feels heavy with unspoken words. I made chamomile tea, unable to stomach anything more substantial, and waited. Around 9:30 a.m., I heard his key in the lock. Greg walked in wearing clothes I didn't recognize, a crisp button-down shirt I'd never seen before, freshly pressed slacks. His face was composed, emotionless as he set his laptop bag on the counter and poured himself coffee without looking at me. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he began, his voice unnervingly calm. "This pregnancy, it's not what I want right now, maybe not ever." The mug slipped from my hand, shattering on our kitchen tile. Hot tea splashed my ankles, but I barely felt it. "What are you talking about?" I managed to say through the tightness in my throat. "We've been trying for years. You were the one who suggested we see the fertility specialist." "That was before," he replied, straightening his collar, still not meeting my eyes. "Before the promotion opportunity, before the future I can see for myself now. I can't do this. A baby, the suburban life, the minivan existence. That's not who I am anymore." I stared at this stranger in my kitchen wearing my husband's face. The man I'd married 5 years ago had been gentle, had talked about having a large family, had seemed genuinely excited about building a life together. "So what are you saying exactly?" My voice sounded distant, as if someone else were speaking. He finally looked at me, his brown eyes cold and determined. "I want a divorce, Natalie. I've already spoken to a lawyer." The world seemed to tilt beneath me as I gripped the counter to steady myself. "You've spoken to a lawyer? When?" He pulled an envelope from his bag. "It doesn't matter. These are the initial papers. My lawyer will contact yours to work out the details." I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. "You're leaving me because I'm pregnant? After we spent years trying to have a baby?" "It's not just the pregnancy," he countered, his tone practiced, rehearsed. "We've been growing apart for years. You must have felt it too. This is just the catalyst that made me finally admit what I've known for some time. We want different things now." His words felt like physical blows. "What different things? Last month you were talking about names for our future children." He had the decency to look away. "People change, Natalie. I've changed. What about our baby?" I whispered, my hand instinctively moving to my stomach. "I'll provide financial support, of course," he said, checking his watch. "I'm not a monster. My lawyer's contact information is in the envelope. I'll be staying at the West Side Hotel until I find a place." And just like that, he was gone, leaving me surrounded by the shards of my broken mug and broken life, the manila envelope mocking me from the counter. Greg and I had met at a fundraising gala for the Children's Hospital, where I worked as a pediatric nurse. He was there representing his marketing firm, which had donated significant services to the hospital's rebranding campaign. I noticed him immediately, tall, confident, with an easy smile that made everyone around him feel special. When he approached me with a glass of champagne and a comment about how anyone who worked with sick children daily deserved a night of celebration, I was charmed. Our courtship was a whirlwind of romantic gestures, surprise weekend getaways, flowers delivered to the hospital, candlelit dinners at restaurants I could never have afforded on my nurse's salary. I fell hard and fast, swept away by his confidence and generosity. When he proposed 6 months later on a hot air balloon at sunrise, I said yes without hesitation. My father's reaction to the engagement had been measured, lacking the enthusiasm I'd expected. "He seems very focused on appearances," Dad had observed after our first family dinner together. "He's just ambitious," I'd defended. "He knows what he wants." Dad hadn't argued, but I caught the slight furrow of his brow, the way he watched Greg throughout the evening. After we married, Greg suggested I reduce my hours at the hospital. "You're always exhausted from those long shifts," he'd said, massaging my shoulders one evening. "We don't need the money. I want you to enjoy life more." It seemed thoughtful at the time. I cut back to part-time, and then to occasional per diem shifts that worked around Greg's increasingly busy schedule. The gradual surrender of my independence happened so subtly I barely noticed. First, it was my career scaling back. Then, it was switching to the hair salon Greg preferred because they know how to bring out your best features. Our friends became primarily his colleagues and their partners. Our vacations were chosen around his work connections and networking opportunities. Even our apartment had been decorated to his specifications, a modern, somewhat sterile aesthetic that photographed, well, when he hosted business associates, but never quite felt like home to me. My father never said anything directly, but I noticed he began inviting me to lunch alone more often, asking pointed questions about my happiness, my goals, my plans for the future beyond being Greg's wife. Dad had raised me alone after my mother died when I was 10. He was a quiet, pragmatic man who built a successful construction supply business through decades of hard work and ethical dealings. He rarely discussed money or business with me, focusing instead on ensuring I grew up feeling secure, loved, and confident in my own abilities. When he was diagnosed with aggressive pancreatic cancer 3 years ago, his concern seemed more focused on my marriage than his illness. During one of our hospital visits, he asked quietly, "Are you truly happy, Natalie? Not just comfortable, but fulfilled?" The question had startled me. "Of course, Dad. Greg takes good care of me." His expression had been unreadable. "That's not what I asked." 2 months after my father's passing, his attorney, Joseph Bennett, had informed me of a modest trust fund Dad had established for me, approximately $300,000, to be managed by Joseph's firm and used according to my needs. Greg had insisted we leave it untouched. "It's not life-changing money," he'd said dismissively. "Better to let it grow for emergencies or our future children's education." He'd seemed annoyed that the trust was in my name alone, with him having no access or control over the funds. 3 hours after Greg walked out, I found myself in my obstetrician's office for my previously scheduled first prenatal appointment. Dr. Morgan performed the routine ultrasound, her expression changing as she studied the screen. "Well," she said, a smile spreading across her face, "this explains your elevated HCG levels. Congratulations, Natalie. You're carrying twins." The world seemed to stop. "Twins?" I echoed. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My voice barely a whisper. "Yes, 2 healthy embryos, both measuring right on track for 8 weeks. She turned the screen toward me, pointing out 2 distinct shapes, 2 tiny flickering heartbeats. "Would you like to know the sex, or would you prefer to wait?" I stared at the screen, tears filling my eyes. "I want to know," I managed through the tightness in my throat. "It looks like 2 girls," she said, studying the images. "Though it's still relatively early, so that could change. 2 baby girls, 2 lives depending on me now. 2 children who would never know what it meant to have their father welcome their arrival." As I left the clinic clutching the ultrasound photos, the full weight of my situation crashed down on me. I was carrying twins, and my husband of 5 years wanted a divorce. The cruel irony wasn't lost on me. After years of trying to start our family, I was finally pregnant with not 1 but 2 babies, and Greg was walking away. I sat in my car, unable to drive, unable to think straight. Who could I call? My father was gone. I had no siblings. My mother had been an only child, and Dad's brother lived abroad and we rarely spoke. Most of the friends I'd had before meeting Greg had gradually drifted away as my life centered more around his social circle. There was really only one person I could think of: Joseph Bennett, my father's attorney. With trembling fingers, I dialed his number. "Natalie," he answered, his deep voice comfortingly familiar. "This is a pleasant surprise. How are you?" The simple question broke the dam. "Not well," I admitted, tears flowing freely now. "Greg asked for a divorce this morning, right after I told him I'm pregnant." There was a moment of silence on the line. "I see," Joseph finally said, his tone shifting to something harder, more professional. "Are you somewhere safe? Can you come to my office?" "I'm in my car outside the doctor's office," I explained, wiping my tears with the back of my hand. "I just found out I'm having twins. Twin girls." "Twins," he repeated, and I heard the scratch of a pen on paper. "Natalie, I need you to come see me immediately. There's something about your father's trust that we need to discuss." If you're finding value in this story, please take a moment to subscribe. Sharing these deeply personal experiences isn't easy, but knowing they might help others makes it worthwhile. I appreciate your support more than you know. "The trust?" I asked, confusion momentarily overriding my distress. "What does that have to do with Greg leaving me?" "Not over the phone," Joseph interrupted, unusual urgency in his voice. Can you drive, or should I send a car for you? The strange insistence cut through my emotional fog. I can drive, I assured him. I'll be there in 20 minutes. I parked in the visitor's lot of the downtown office building where Joseph's law firm occupied most of the fourth floor. In the elevator, I caught my reflection. Red-rimmed eyes, pale face, hair hastily pulled back in a ponytail. I looked nothing like the polished, put-together woman Greg had molded me to be over the years. The woman who always appeared appropriate at his business functions. Joseph was waiting when his assistant showed me in. He took one look at me and immediately came around his desk, guiding me to a comfortable chair and pressing a glass of water into my hand. "Natalie, I am so sorry about Greg," he said, settling into the chair beside me rather than returning behind his desk. "But I have to say, I'm not entirely surprised." I stared at him. "What do you mean? Did you know this would happen?" "Not specifically," he said, removing his glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose. "But your father had concerns. That's why he structured your trust the way he did." Joseph opened a folder on the side table. "Thomas came to me about 6 weeks before he passed away. He wanted to make very specific adjustments to your trust fund." "What kind of adjustments?" I asked, setting down the water glass with a hand. That wasn't quite steady. "He added what we call a marriage protection clause with a pregnancy contingency," Joseph explained, putting his glasses back on to review the document. "In simple terms, if your spouse ever abandoned you during a pregnancy, the trust would immediately activate its secondary provisions." The glass nearly slipped from my fingers. That's impossible. Dad couldn't have predicted this specific situation." "Not predicted precisely. Protected against," Joseph corrected gently. "Thomas was a remarkable man who understood people in ways that sometimes seemed uncanny. He'd seen similar situations play out with business associates over the years. He wanted to make sure you were protected, just in case." I shook my head, unwilling to believe it. Even if he had doubts? How could he have known Greg would leave me when I got pregnant? That makes no sense. "Natalie," Joseph said carefully, "your father expressed concerns about Greg from the beginning. He saw something beneath the charm and the perfect manners that troubled him. To me, he voiced those concerns quite clearly, though he was careful never to criticize your husband. To your face. He didn't want to damage your relationship in case he was wrong." "Dad always seemed polite to Greg," I said weakly. "He told me he seemed very focused on appearances and status," Joseph agreed. "But he also told me privately that he worried about Greg's character, about how he might react if your life together ever became less advantageous to his personal ambitions." I felt sick, memories flooding back. Dad watching Greg carefully at family gatherings, asking me those pointed questions about my happiness. His insistence that I keep my nursing license active even when I was barely working. "Protected how?" I finally asked, setting down the water glass before I dropped it. "What exactly did Dad do?" Joseph's expression shifted to something I couldn't quite read. Satisfaction, perhaps. "That's what we need to discuss. Because as of this morning, when Greg asked for a divorce while you're carrying his children, your father's contingency plan has officially activated." He leaned forward slightly. "And Greg has no idea what's coming." I left Joseph's office. 2 hours later, with my head spinning, clutching a folder full of documents I could barely comprehend. The early evening air felt thick and oppressive as I made my way to my car, my phone buzzing with yet another message from Greg, the 5th one since I'd silenced it during my meeting with Joseph. All variations on the same theme. "Where are you?" "We need to discuss logistics. My lawyer needs information. Are you ignoring me?" The trust fund I'd thought was modest, around $300,000, had been merely the visible portion, the surface level that Greg had been allowed to know about. The hidden assets triggered by Greg's abandonment were substantial. Controlling interest in my father's construction supply company, Campbell Building Materials, minority stakes in 2 commercial developments in the city, and a diversified investment portfolio worth nearly $2 million. Your father was an extremely shrewd businessman, Joseph had explained, spreading documents across his desk. He kept these assets compartmentalized for 2 reasons: tax efficiency and to protect you from potential pressure from Greg. Thomas was concerned that if Greg knew the full extent of your inheritance, it might either accelerate his timeline for leaving once he had access, or cause him to stay for the wrong reasons. The most shocking revelation was about Campbell Building Materials, the company my father had built from nothing over 40 years. The company was now the primary supplier for Westridge Development Group, the firm that had recently headhunted Greg from his marketing position, offering him a VP role overseeing their new luxury condominium project. A project that, according to Joseph, was critically dependent on maintaining its current supply chain relationships that now, technically, fell under my control. So, what do we do now? I had asked, a strange calm settling over me as the pieces fell into place. We wait, Joseph replied, a hint of something almost predatory in his smile. We let Greg show his hand. But Natalie, you need to understand, you're now in a position of strength few women in your situation ever experience. Your father made sure of that. When Greg called again that evening, I answered. His voice was clipped, professional, the tone he used for business calls. Finally, where have you been all day? We need to discuss the logistics of this separation. My lawyer has prepared a settlement outline that's fair to both parties, considering the circumstances. What circumstances would those be, Greg? I asked, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. The ones where you walk out on your pregnant wife, or the ones where that wife is carrying twins? There was a moment of silence. Twins? He finally said, an odd note in his voice. Calculation, not surprise. Yes, twin girls, I confirmed, one hand resting protectively over my stomach. I had my first prenatal appointment today. That complicates things, he said after a moment. But it doesn't change the fundamental situation. This marriage isn't working for me anymore, Natalie. I've outgrown it, outgrown us. The settlement offer accounts for child support, of course. 1 child or 2 doesn't change my commitment to providing financially. The cold, transactional nature of his response crystallized something inside me. This man, this stranger, had never loved me. Not really. He had loved the idea of me, the carefully molded version of Natalie that complemented his professional image. The moment I threatened to become more than an accessory to his life, to become a mother with needs and demands that might conflict with his ambitions, he was ready to discard me. I've retained an attorney, I said simply. Joseph Bennett will be representing me. Please have your lawyer contact him directly from now on. Greg laughed, the sound sharp and dismissive. Your dad's old attorney? Natalie, this is a complex divorce with significant career implications for me. You need someone who specializes in family law, not some small-town general practitioner who handled your father's will. Joseph is more than capable, I replied. I trust him to represent my interests, and those of our daughters. Fine, Greg sighed. Have it your way, but don't let emotion drive you into fighting a settlement that's more than generous. I'm willing to be reasonable as long as this proceeds quickly and quietly. My new position at Westridge requires a clean public image. I'm sure it does, I said. Good night, Greg. I ended the call before he could respond, a sense of purpose replacing the hollow ache that had dominated my day. For the first time, since seeing those 2 lines on the pregnancy test that morning, was it really just that morning? I felt something other than shock and despair. I felt the first stirrings of power. The next 3 days passed in a blur of meetings, phone, calls, and careful planning, Joseph assembled a small team including a family law specialist named Melissa Wong and a financial analyst who began reviewing Greg's assets and income sources. I provided emails, account statements, and other documentation that would establish a clear picture of our marital finances, or so I thought. "He's been hiding income," Melissa said during our second meeting, pointing to discrepancies in the statements. "These bonuses were deposited into an account that isn't listed in any of your joint financial records. There's also evidence he's been preparing for this exit for some time. Large transfers began about 3 months ago, right around when he would have been approached about the Westridge position." The revelation shouldn't have hurt, not after everything else, but it did. 3 months ago, we were still actively trying to conceive. He had held me after another negative pregnancy test, promising we would keep trying, that having a family was what he wanted too. All lies, carefully calculated to maintain the status quo until he could position himself for maximum advantage. "What's our next step?" I asked, pushing aside the hurt to focus on the practical matters at hand. "We wait for their official settlement proposal," Joseph explained. "Based on what we know, it will almost certainly be inadequate considering the hidden assets, but we'll let them make the first move." The proposal arrived the next day, a document so clearly one-sided that Joseph actually laughed out loud while reviewing it. "He's offering you the bare minimum in child support, wants to sell the apartment and split the proceeds, and assumes you'll waive any claim to his retirement accounts or future income from Westridge. There's not even a provision for health insurance coverage during your pregnancy. He knows I've been working only per diem shifts at the hospital," I said quietly. "I don't have my own health insurance. The twins and I are covered under his policy." "Exactly," Melissa interjected. "This proposal would leave you virtually unsupported during the most vulnerable time. It's strategically timed to pressure you into a quick settlement while you're worried about medical coverage." "It's time to play our hand," Joseph decided, closing the folder. "Natalie, are you ready for the next phase?" I nodded, my hand instinctively moving to my stomach where my daughters grew, unaware of the battle being waged on their behalf. "Yes, let's show Greg exactly who he's dealing with." The meeting was set for Greg's new office at Westridge Development, neutral territory, as his lawyer put it in the email. Joseph, Melissa, and I arrived precisely on time, entering the sleek, modern conference room where Greg sat with his attorney, a sharp-featured man named Lawrence Keller, known for representing high-net-worth clients in contentious divorces. Greg barely glanced at me, his attention on Joseph as introductions were made. "I was sorry to hear about your father's passing," Keller began with practiced sympathy. "Thomas Campbell was well respected in the construction industry." "Thank you," I replied simply, noting the slight narrowing of Greg's eyes at the mention of my father's name. The preliminary discussion was all polite professionalism, acknowledgement of the unfortunate circumstances, assurances that everyone wanted a fair and efficient resolution, gentle reminders that there were children to consider. "We've reviewed your settlement proposal," Joseph said eventually, his tone conversational. "Unfortunately, it fails to account for several significant factors." Keller leaned forward. "Such as?" "Well, for starters, it makes no provision for health insurance coverage for Natalie and the twins during pregnancy and early infancy, a period with substantial medical costs. Greg has offered 6 months of COBRA coverage," Keller countered. "More than generous, given the brevity of the marriage." 5 years is hardly brief," Melissa interjected. "And there's also the matter of the undisclosed accounts we've identified." She slid a document across the table. "These transactions suggest a pattern of hidden assets that would naturally affect any equitable distribution." Greg's expression remained neutral, but I noticed a muscle twitching in his jaw, a tell I recognized from our rare arguments. "These are business transactions related to my transition to Westridge," he said dismissively. "They have no bearing on marital assets." "Perhaps," Joseph acknowledged. but they do establish a timeline that suggests this divorce was planned well before Natalie's pregnancy announcement, a fact that might interest the court. "Is this how we're proceeding?" Keller asked, his tone hardening, with thinly veiled threats about how things might look to a judge. "My client has made a fair offer considering the circumstances. The circumstances being that he abandoned his pregnant wife upon learning she's carrying his twin daughters," I said quietly, speaking for the first time. All eyes turned to me. After 3 years of actively trying to conceive, after presenting himself as excited about parenthood right up until the moment it became reality. Greg's face flushed. "That's not what happened, and you know it, Natalie. Our marriage has been struggling for years. The pregnancy just forced us to face what wasn't working." "Interesting timing, though," Joseph commented mildly. "Coinciding so perfectly with your new position at Westridge, a position that apparently requires a certain image that doesn't include a pregnant wife and newborn twins." "This is unproductive," Keller interrupted. "We're here to discuss settlement terms, not relitigate the reasons for the divorce." "You're right," Joseph agreed. "So let's discuss the terms that would be acceptable to our client." He opened a folder and slid a document across the table, not to Keller, but directly to Greg. "I think you'll find these terms more reflective of the actual circumstances." I watched as Greg scanned the document, his expression shifting from professional detachment to confusion to something approaching alarm. "This is absurd," he finally said, pushing the paper away. "These figures bear no relationship to reality." "Actually," Joseph replied, "they're based on a complete accounting of assets, including those you apparently hoped would remain undiscovered." "But there's something else you should know," I said, my heart pounding but my voice steady. "Something that might affect how you view these terms." I removed a document from my own folder and placed it before Greg. "Campbell Building Materials, my father's company, the one supplying approximately 70% of the materials for Westridge's Collins Tower project. The company that, as of this morning, is majority owned by me through my father's trust." The color drained from Greg's face. "What are you talking about?" "Your new employer's flagship project depends on maintaining its current supply chain," I explained calmly. "A supply chain now under my control. Did you know that before accepting the position? Did you realize my father owned the company that Westridge can't function without?" Keller was looking between us with growing concern. "Mr. Bennett, if this is some kind of negotiation tactic—" "It's not a tactic," Joseph interrupted. "It's a material fact that affects the relative positions of the parties. Natalie is now the controlling shareholder of Campbell Building Materials, as well as a significant investor in 2 commercial properties that Westridge is currently developing." "That's impossible," Greg said, but there was a note of uncertainty in his voice. "Thomas Campbell sold his company years ago. Everyone in the industry knows that." "He sold a minority stake," Joseph corrected. "He maintained controlling interest through a family trust. A trust with very specific provisions that activated when you asked for a divorce while Natalie was pregnant." The silence in the room was absolute. I could almost see the calculations running behind Greg's eyes. The implications for his new position, for the projects he'd been hired to oversee, for the career advancement that had apparently been worth sacrificing his marriage and unborn children. "This changes nothing," he finally said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Business is business. Personal matters should remain separate." "I completely agree," I replied, "which is why I've scheduled a meeting with Cameron Westridge tomorrow morning to discuss the supply chain arrangements for the Collins Tower. As the new majority owner of Campbell Building Materials, it's important that I introduce myself to key clients, don't you think?" Greg's face had gone from pale to ashen. Cameron Westridge was the founder and CEO of Westridge Development, Greg's new boss and the man who had personally recruited him. "You wouldn't," he whispered. "Business is business," I repeated his words back to him. Just as you're making business decisions about our marriage and your responsibilities to your children, I'm making business decisions about my company's relationships." Keller leaned close to Greg, whispering urgently in his ear. After a moment, Greg nodded stiffly. "We need to reassess our position," Keller announced. "Perhaps we could schedule a follow-up meeting later this week?" "Of course," Joseph agreed pleasantly. "Though I should mention that Natalie's meeting with Mr. Westridge is set for 10 a.m. tomorrow. Any revised proposal would ideally be received before then." As we gathered our papers to leave, Greg caught my arm. "Natalie, wait. We should talk privately." I looked pointedly at his hand until he released me. "Anything you have to say can be communicated through our attorneys," I said quietly. "You made your choice, Greg. Now you can live with the consequences." The settlement agreement arrived by courier at 8:45 the next morning, a document so dramatically different from the initial proposal that Joseph actually whistled when he reviewed it. Full medical coverage for you and the twins through birth and for 5 years beyond, child support at 200% of the statutory guidelines, a lump sum settlement that acknowledges your contribution to his career advancement, and full ownership of the apartment transferred to your name, he summarized, plus a confidentiality agreement that prevents either party from discussing the terms publicly. "What's he getting in return?" I asked, still suspicious of anything that seemed too good. "Your silence," Joseph explained. "No meeting with Cameron Westridge, no public disclosure of his conduct during your pregnancy, no interference with the Collins Tower supply arrangements. Essentially, he's buying your discretion." I considered this. "And if I want people to know what he did? If I want his new colleagues to understand exactly what kind of man they've hired?" Joseph sat beside me. "That's absolutely your right. But consider what you gain from this agreement versus what you gain from public exposure. The settlement provides financial security for you and your daughters, a clean break, and the ability to move forward without a lengthy court battle during your pregnancy." He was right, of course. As satisfying as it might be to see Greg's carefully constructed professional image tarnished, my priority needed to be my health and my daughter's well-being. "There's one more thing," Joseph added, turning to the final page. "Greg is waiving any custody claims beyond standard visitation rights. You'll have sole legal custody and primary physical custody of the twins." This was unexpected. Greg had initially insisted on joint custody, positioning himself as an equally committed parent, despite his actions suggesting otherwise. "Why would he give up custody so easily?" I asked. "Because fighting for it would require court appearances, evaluations, and public scrutiny he clearly can't afford right now," Joseph explained. Westridge Development made it clear that a messy custody battle would violate their conditions for his continued employment. 4 hours later, it was done. Greg arrived with Keller, signed the papers without meeting my eyes, and left without a word. No dramatic confrontation, no last-minute negotiations, just a silent surrender that spoke volumes about how completely the tables had turned. As the door closed behind him, Joseph squeezed my shoulder. "Congratulations, Natalie. You're officially free." Free. The word resonated through me as I placed a protective hand over my growing belly. Free from Greg's manipulation, from his control, from the constant need to measure my worth through his approval. Outside Joseph's office, rain had given way to watery sunshine, the city glistening with the particular beauty that follows a storm. I stood on the steps, breathing deeply, feeling lighter than I had in years despite the literal and figurative weight I now carried. 6 months later, I stood in what would soon be the twins' nursery, supervising the delivery of 2 matching cribs. The room had been transformed from Greg's home office to a bright, cheerful space with pale yellow walls and a hand-painted mural of cherry blossoms that reminded me of my father. My belly had grown enormous. Carrying twin girls at 7 months was no small feat, but I moved with a newfound confidence that had nothing to do with physical grace and everything to do with the woman I was becoming. The apartment itself had transformed along with me. Gone were Greg's austere design choices, the uncomfortable modernist furniture, the monochromatic color scheme, the impersonal artwork selected to impress his colleagues. In their place were warm colors, comfortable seating, and photos of people I actually loved. My father in his workshop, my mother holding me as a baby, my nursing school graduation. The space finally felt like home, my home. The most significant change had come 8 weeks after the divorce was finalized, when Joseph connected me with an executive at Campbell Building Materials who was looking for someone to oversee their charitable foundation. The part-time position allowed me to use my healthcare background to direct funding toward medical initiatives while maintaining a flexible schedule that would accommodate motherhood. Your father always intended for you to be involved with the company in whatever capacity interested you, Joseph had explained. He would be proud to see you making it your own. After years of being told my career was secondary, my professional skills merely a hobby rather than a vocation, someone was recognizing my value and offering a meaningful role that accommodated my new life as a mother. The creative fulfillment of applying my healthcare knowledge in a new context, combined with the financial security to raise my daughters on my own terms, had awakened something in me that Greg had nearly extinguished, the sense of possibility. As I made my way carefully back downstairs after the delivery men left, I paused before the framed quote I'd hung in the entryway, words from one of my father's rare letters to me that had taken on new meaning. The strongest people are not those who never fall, but those who rise with greater determination after each setback. My transformation was still ongoing, an evolution rather than a sudden change. There were still moments of doubt, flashes of the insecurity Greg had cultivated in me over years. But those moments grew fewer with each passing day, replaced by a steady certainty that I was exactly where I needed to be, becoming exactly who I was meant to be. The irony wasn't lost on me that Greg's decision to leave, what should have been my greatest vulnerability, became the catalyst for my greatest strength. My daughters would be born into a home filled with love and stability, with a mother who had discovered her own worth not through someone else's validation, but through her own resilience. When my daughters asked someday about their father, I would tell them a story not centered on betrayal, but on discovery. Not about what was lost, but what was found. I would tell them about their grandfather Thomas, who saw clearly what others missed, who planned meticulously for a future he wouldn't live to see, but who embedded in legal documents and financial structures a profound message of love and faith in his daughter's strength. The months following the divorce settlement brought an unexpected peace to my life. The first week without Greg felt strange. The absence of his footsteps in the hallway, his coffee mug in the sink, his cologne lingering in the closet. But that strangeness quickly gave way to a sense of liberation. I deep-cleaned the apartment, rearranged furniture that had remained static for years, and donated the designer suits Greg had insisted I wear to his corporate functions. Each small change was a reclamation, a declaration that this space, like my life, was now entirely mine to shape. My body was changing rapidly as the twins grew. By my 6th month, my previously flat stomach had expanded into a prominent dome that made navigation of crowded spaces challenging. At my 24-week appointment, Dr. Morgan confirmed that both girls were developing perfectly. "They're in the 60th percentile for growth," she said, pointing to the ultrasound screen where my daughters tumbled and kicked. "Active little ones, too. Good, strong heartbeats." She printed several images for me, and this time, unlike the first sonogram when I'd left her office in shock and grief, I walked out with tears of joy. That evening, I taped the images to my refrigerator and spent an hour talking to my daughters, telling them about the nursery I was preparing, the world they would soon enter, the people who already loved them, including a grandfather they would know only through stories. Joseph and I met monthly to discuss the trust and my growing involvement with Campbell Building Materials. The company's CEO, Martin Reynolds, had been my father's right-hand man for 15 years and had managed operations since Dad's illness had progressed. Martin welcomed me warmly, but without condescension, taking time to explain aspects of the business I didn't understand while genuinely valuing my input on the foundation's direction. "Your father always said you had his eye for people," Martin told me during one of our meetings. He believed that was more valuable than any knowledge of construction materials or profit margins. This revelation, that my father had spoken of me with pride in professional settings, that he had seen abilities in me I hadn't recognized in myself, was profoundly healing. The pediatric nurse who had gradually surrendered her professional identity was rediscovering her capacity for discernment, for leadership, for meaningful contribution. The foundation work suited me perfectly. 3 days a week, I reviewed grant applications from healthcare initiatives, coordinated with local hospitals about their equipment needs, and developed a scholarship program for nursing students committed to working in underserved communities. The other 2 weekdays, I participated in Lamaze classes, decorated the nursery, and reconnected with friends who had drifted to the periphery during my marriage to Greg. Rachel, my closest friend from nursing school, had been particularly quick to reestablish our bond. "I've missed you," she said simply during our first lunch after the divorce. "Greg always made me feel like I was intruding when I called." Her observation startled me. I hadn't recognized at the time how Greg had subtly discouraged friendships he couldn't control or that didn't serve his social climbing agenda. Rachel became a regular visitor, bringing paint samples for the nursery, accompanying me to doctor's appointments, and never once saying, "I told you so," despite having expressed reservations about Greg from the beginning. At 30 weeks, my obstetrician recommended I begin working from home exclusively. "Twin pregnancies often deliver early," Dr. Morgan explained. "I'd like you to minimize stress and maximize rest in these final weeks." Martin arranged for me to video conference into meetings and had necessary files delivered to my apartment. Joseph made weekly visits to handle trust business that couldn't be managed remotely. It was during one of these visits, as we reviewed quarterly statements from Campbell Building Materials, that Joseph mentioned something that caught me completely off guard. "Westridge Development is struggling with the Collins Tower project," he said casually, sipping the herbal tea I'd prepared. "Apparently, there have been significant delays and cost overruns." I set down my cup slowly. "Greg's project?" Joseph nodded. "The very same. Word in the industry is that he promised Cameron Westridge he could trim 20% from the construction timeline without sacrificing quality. An impossible task even for someone with actual experience in development, which, as we know, Greg doesn't have. "Marketing experience doesn't translate to construction management," I agreed, feeling a complex wave of emotions. Concern for the project itself, which employed hundreds of workers. Satisfaction that Greg's overconfidence was being exposed, and a strange sense of vindication that my father's assessment of his character had proven correct yet again. "There's more," Joseph continued, his expression carefully neutral. "Martin received a call from Greg yesterday. Apparently, he's requesting more favorable payment terms from Campbell Materials to help offset the project's cash flow issues." The irony was almost too perfect. "What did Martin tell him?" I asked. "That any changes to established contracts would need board approval, and that you sit on the board." Joseph couldn't quite suppress his smile. I'm told Greg was momentarily speechless. I should have felt triumph, perhaps even a desire for retribution. After all, Greg had discarded me at my most vulnerable moment, choosing career advancement over his marriage and unborn children. But instead, I felt only a weary resignation. The contract terms stay as they are, I decided. Not out of spite, but because changing them would set a bad precedent for the company. Greg made promises he couldn't keep, to Westridge and to me. The consequences are his to manage. Joseph nodded approvingly. Your father would say exactly the same thing. Later that evening, as I folded the tiny clothes Rachel had brought for the twins, my phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. "Natalie, it's Greg. We need to talk about Campbell materials." I stared at the message for a long moment, my hand instinctively moving to my belly where one of the twins was performing what felt like somersaults. For the first time in weeks, Greg had acknowledged my existence, not because he cared about my well-being or our daughters, but because he needed something from me. I didn't respond. Whatever Greg wanted to discuss could go through proper channels. Martin, the board, our respective attorneys. I had spent enough of my life accommodating Greg's needs and demands. The boundaries I was establishing weren't just for me anymore. They were for my daughters, who deserved a mother who valued herself enough to require respect from others. The next morning, my doorbell rang unexpectedly. Through the security camera Joseph had insisted on installing, I saw Greg standing in the hallway. His normally perfect appearance slightly disheveled, hair not quite perfectly styled, tie slightly askew. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, but curiosity won out. I activated the intercom. "What do you want, Greg?" His head jerked up at the sound of my voice. "Natalie, please. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." I hesitated, then pressed the button to unlock the door, keeping the security chain engaged. When Greg reached my apartment, his eyes widened at the sight of me. My pregnancy was impossible. To ignore now, my maternity dress stretched over the prominent curve housing our daughters. "You look," he began, then seemed to think better of whatever he'd planned to say. "Thank you for seeing me." I remained in the doorway, one hand on the partially open door. 5 minutes, Greg. What's so urgent that you needed to come here in person?" He glanced at the security chain, then back at me. "Could we sit down? This is a business matter that would be better discussed privately." "We have nothing private to discuss," I replied evenly. "Our relationship is legally dissolved, and any business between Campbell Materials and Westridge can be addressed through appropriate corporate channels." Greg's expression tightened. "This is ridiculous, Natalie. We were married for 5 years. I'm the father of your children. You can at least hear me out without this theatrical production." His dismissive tone, so familiar, so condescending, crystallized something inside me. "No, Greg, I can't. You forfeited the right to my time and consideration when you walked out. If you have a business proposal, email it to Martin Reynolds. If it's about the twins, contact my attorney. Your 5 minutes are up." I began to close the door, but Greg's next words stopped me. "I made a mistake," he said, his voice suddenly lacking its usual polished confidence. "About everything. The divorce, the timing, how I handled it all. It was a mistake. I see that now." I studied his face, searching for sincerity but finding only desperation. "The Collins Tower is 6 weeks behind schedule and millions over. Budget," I said quietly. "Westridge is threatening to replace you. That's why you're here, not because you've had some moral epiphany about abandoning your pregnant wife." His silence confirmed my assessment. After a moment, he tried again. "It's more complicated than that. Yes, the project is in trouble, but that's made me reevaluate everything. My priorities, what really matters. Seeing you now." He gestured vaguely at my pregnant form. "It makes everything else seem less important." "How convenient," I observed, "that this realization coincides perfectly with your professional difficulties. Was it Cameron Westridge who suggested you try reconciling with your pregnant ex-wife who happens to control his main supplier? Or did you come up with that strategy on your own?" Greg's expression confirmed I'd hit the mark. "It's not like that," he protested, but there was no conviction in his voice. "Goodbye, Greg," I said, closing the door firmly and engaging the additional security lock Joseph had installed. Through the door, I heard Greg's frustrated sigh, followed by the sound of retreating footsteps. I leaned against the wall, my heart racing, overwhelmed by conflicting emotions. Part of me, a smaller part than I might have expected, felt a painful twist at seeing him again, at the reminder of what we had once been to each other. But a stronger, clearer part recognized the encounter for exactly what it was. One more attempt by Greg to use me for his own advantage. I called Joseph immediately to report the unexpected visit. "I had a feeling he might try something like this," Joseph said, his voice tight with concern. "The Collins Tower situation is worse than I initially thought. Westridge is considering bringing in another firm to take over the project management, which would effectively end Greg's career and development before it really began," I concluded. "Yes, which makes him desperate, and desperate people can be unpredictable. I'm sending additional security to your building for the next few weeks, just as a precaution." I started to protest that it wasn't necessary, but Joseph cut me off, gently. "Natalie, it's not just about you anymore. Your daughters deserve every protection we can provide." He was right, of course. Every decision I made now affected 3 lives, not just one. The twins had become my center, my focus, the catalyst for a strength I hadn't known I possessed. Each kick and movement reminded me that vulnerability and power could coexist, that carrying these precious lives made me physically more vulnerable, in some ways, but had awakened a fierce protective instinct that made me stronger in others. That night, I dreamed of my father for the first time since his death. In the dream, he was healthy again, sitting in his favorite workshop chair, surrounded by the tools and wood scraps that had been his joy outside of work. "You see clearly now," he said, his hands busy with a small wooden object I couldn't quite make out. "I always knew you would when the time came." I woke with tears on my cheeks, but a profound sense of peace in my heart. Dad had never doubted me, even when I had doubted myself. The next day, I received an unexpected visitor, Cameron Westridge himself, founder and CEO of Westridge Development. His assistant called first, requesting a brief meeting to discuss mutual business interests. Curious and slightly wary, I agreed, suggesting we meet at the Campbell Materials headquarters rather than my apartment. Joseph insisted on being present, a condition Westridge accepted without hesitation. Cameron Westridge was not what I expected. From Greg's descriptions, I had imagined a hard-driving, aggressive businessman in his 60s, intimidating and demanding. Instead, I met a thoughtful, soft-spoken man, perhaps a decade older than me, whose calm demeanor suggested someone who listened more than he spoke. He greeted me with genuine warmth, his eyes taking in my pregnant form with a kind smile. "Thank you for meeting with me, Mrs. Parker," he began, using my married name, though I had legally reverted to Campbell. "Ms. Campbell, please," I corrected gently. He nodded in acknowledgement. "Ms. Campbell, I appreciate your time, especially given your condition. I'll be direct. The Collins Tower project is facing significant challenges under its current management. I've come to discuss potential solutions that might benefit both our companies." Joseph and I exchanged glances. "If you're here to ask for concessions from Campbell Materials because of my personal history with Greg, I'm afraid you're wasting your time," I said carefully. "Business and personal matters remain separate." Westridge smiled slightly. "Actually, I'm here because I want them to remain separate. Your ex-husband has been suggesting that your company's terms are unnecessarily rigid and that your personal feelings might be influencing business decisions." The implication was clear. Greg was blaming me for his project's failures. "That's completely untrue," I replied, keeping my voice level despite the surge of indignation. "Campbell Materials has maintained the same contract terms we extend to all clients of similar size and history. There has been no punitive action whatsoever." "I believed as much," Westridge nodded, "which is why I wanted to meet you personally. Gregory." Parker presented himself as someone with exceptional project management skills and development experience. it's becoming clear that his qualifications were embellished. He paused delicately. I'm curious, was that your experience of him in other contexts as well? The question surprised me. Mr. Westridge, I'm not comfortable discussing my former marriage in a business setting. He nodded again, respecting the boundary. Of course, I apologize for overstepping. Let me be more specific. Westridge Development is considering bringing in a new project manager for Collins Tower. Before making that decision, I wanted to ensure that such a change wouldn't negatively impact our relationship with Campbell Materials. Joseph stepped in smoothly. Campbell Materials' commitment is to the project itself, not to any particular individual managing it. Our terms would remain consistent regardless of personnel changes at Westridge. Cameron seemed satisfied with this answer. That's precisely what I hoped to hear. In that case, I believe we can proceed with the necessary adjustments without concern for supply chain disruptions. As he rose to leave, Westridge hesitated, then spoke in a more personal tone. Ms. Campbell, if I may, I lost my own father shortly before my first child was born. It's a unique kind of grief, navigating parenthood without your own parents' guidance. His unexpected empathy caught me off guard. How did you manage it? I asked softly. I came to believe that my father had given me everything I needed. Before he left, he replied, sometimes in ways I didn't recognize until much later. From what I understand of Thomas Campbell, he did the same for you. With that, he shook my hand and departed, leaving me with a renewed appreciation for my father's foresight and a growing certainty that Greg's carefully constructed professional facade was crumbling just as completely as his personal one had. 2 days later, Martin called to inform me that Greg had been removed from the Collins Tower project. Westridge is bringing in a senior project manager from their Chicago office, he explained. They've requested a meeting to review the supply schedule, but otherwise, everything continues as planned. I felt a complex mix of emotions at the news, a flicker of sympathy for Greg's professional setback quickly overshadowed by the recognition that, like every consequence he now faced, it was the direct result of his own choices and deceptions. At 34 weeks, during a routine checkup, Dr. Morgan noticed a concerning rise in my blood pressure. I'm not liking these numbers, she said, studying the monitor. And there's more protein in your urine than I'd like to see. I think we're looking at the beginning stages of preeclampsia. The diagnosis sent a spike of fear through me. I knew from my nursing background that preeclampsia could be dangerous for both mother and babies, if not carefully managed. What does that mean for the twins? I asked, my protective instincts immediately engaged. At 34 weeks, they're developed enough that early delivery is a viable option if necessary, she explained. For now, I'm prescribing complete bed rest and daily monitoring. If your condition worsens, or if the babies show any signs of distress, we'll move forward with an immediate C-section. Bed rest presented logistical challenges I hadn't anticipated. Rachel immediately stepped up, arranging to stay in my guest room and work remotely so she could help with meals and household needs. Martin organized a rotating schedule of assistants to bring necessary work documents and handle anything that couldn't be managed via video call. Joseph visited daily, often bringing groceries or meals along with trust business. It was during one of these visits, as I reclined on the sofa reviewing foundation grant applications while Joseph sorted through mail at the dining table, that he made a small sound of surprise. "What is it?" I asked, looking up from my laptop. He held up an envelope with Greg's law firm as the return address. "Probably nothing serious," he said, his tone carefully neutral as he opened it. "Likely just routine follow-up to the—" He stopped abruptly, his expression darkening as he scanned the contents. "Joseph?" I prompted, suddenly anxious. "What does it say?" He hesitated, then crossed the room to sit beside me. "It's a petition to modify the divorce agreement," he said, handing me the document. "Greg is seeking joint custody of the twins after their birth. with a 50-50 physical custody arrangement beginning when they're 3 months old. The room seemed to tilt as I read the coldly legal language. Greg was asserting that he had reconsidered his position regarding parental responsibilities and now wished to actively participate in his daughter's lives from the earliest possible stage. The document included a proposed schedule where the twins would alternate weeks between our homes once they were 12 weeks old. "This is insane," I whispered, my hand instinctively moving to my belly where one of the girls was kicking vigorously. "He wants to separate them from me for entire weeks when they're still newborns, when they might still be nursing?" Joseph took the papers back, his expression grim. "It's a negotiating tactic, Natalie. He doesn't expect to get exactly what he's asking for. This is about leverage." "Leverage for what?" I demanded, my voice breaking. "The divorce is final. The settlement was agreed upon. What more does he want from me?" Joseph sighed heavily. "Based on the timing, I'd say this is directly related to his removal from the Collins Tower project. He's looking for a way to pressure you, and by extension, Campbell Materials." The realization that Greg would use our unborn daughters as pawns in a business negotiation sent a wave of nausea through me that had nothing to do with pregnancy. "He doesn't even want them," I said, tears filling my eyes. "He made that abundantly clear when he walked out. This is just cruel." Joseph squeezed my hand gently. "It's manipulative and it's desperate, but it's also not going to work. No family court judge would grant this request given the circumstances of your divorce and his previous willingness to waive significant custody rights." "But we'll have to fight it," I said, understanding dawning. "Which means legal proceedings, stress, potential delays in finalizing the business arrangements with Westridge's new project manager, all while I'm on bed rest preparing to deliver twins." Joseph nodded grimly. "That's his calculation, yes, but he's overlooking something important." "What's that?" I asked, wiping away tears of frustration. "He's assuming you're still the same woman who would do anything to avoid conflict," Joseph said, his voice gentle but firm. "The woman who would compromise her own interests rather than engage in a difficult confrontation. But that's not who you are anymore, Natalie, and it's certainly not who your father raised you to be." He was right. The Natalie who had gradually surrendered her independence to keep peace in her marriage would have been devastated by this legal maneuver, might even have considered giving Greg what he wanted just to avoid the stress of fighting. But that Natalie had been replaced by a woman who understood exactly what was at stake, not just for herself, but for her daughters. "Call Melissa," I said, referring to our family law specialist. "Tell her we're not even entertaining this proposal. We'll fight it with everything we have." Joseph smiled, pride evident in his expression. "I'll do that. Immediately. And Natalie, your blood pressure. Try not to let this upset you more than necessary. Remember what Dr. Morgan said. It was easier said than done." Despite my determination not to let Greg's tactics affect me, my next checkup showed my blood pressure had risen further. "I'm concerned," Dr. Morgan said frankly. "The twins look good on the monitor, strong heartbeats, good movement. But your pressure is climbing despite medication. I think we need to consider scheduling a C-section within the next few days." The prospect of delivery was both frightening and exciting. After all the months of preparation, of talking to my daughters, as they grew within me, I would finally meet them face to face. But the timing, just days after receiving Greg's custody petition, added an unwelcome layer of stress to what should have been a purely joyful anticipation. As Rachel drove me home from the appointment, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. "Hello?" I answered cautiously. "Natalie, it's Cameron Westridge." His warm, measured voice was instantly recognizable. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all," I replied, wondering why the CEO of Westridge Development would be calling me directly. "I understand your ex-husband has filed a rather aggressive Custody petition, he continued, causing me to nearly drop the phone in surprise. May I ask how you learned about that? I asked, signaling to Rachel to pull over so I could focus on the conversation. Gregory contacted me this morning, Westridge explained, clear disapproval in his tone. He suggested that a mutually beneficial arrangement might be possible if Westridge were to reconsider his position with the Collins Tower project. When pressed for details, he implied that his custody petition might be withdrawn if Campbell Materials were willing to provide certain concessions. The sheer audacity of Greg's attempt at manipulation left me momentarily speechless. Mr. Westridge, I finally managed, I want to be absolutely clear that Greg's legal maneuvers have nothing to do with Campbell Materials or our business relationship with Westridge Development. My personal situation and the company's operations remain entirely separate. I never doubted that for a moment, he assured me. That's precisely why I'm calling. Whatever game Gregory Parker is playing, Westridge Development wants no part of it. I've instructed our legal team to document his inappropriate approach, which I'm happy to provide to your attorney if it would be helpful in your custody matter. Tears of relief and gratitude filled my eyes. That would be incredibly helpful, Mr. Westridge. Thank you. Please, call me Cameron, he replied. And Natalie? For what it's worth, I don't believe Gregory Parker's petition has anything to do with genuine concern for his children. From one parent to another, I find that unforgivable. After ending the call, I sat in the parked car, processing what had just happened. Greg's desperate attempt to salvage his career had backfired spectacularly. By trying to use Westridge as leverage against me, he had instead created a powerful ally who was now willing to provide evidence of his unethical behavior, evidence that would significantly strengthen my position in the custody dispute. Everything. Okay? Rachel asked, concerned by my prolonged silence. I turned to her with a smile that felt more genuine than any I'd managed since receiving the custody petition. Better than okay, I said. I think we've just witnessed what my father would call the chickens coming home to roost. That evening, as Rachel prepared dinner and I rested on the sofa as directed, Joseph called with more developments. I've reviewed Westridge's documentation of Greg's approach, he said, an undercurrent of satisfaction in his voice. It's damning, Natalie. He explicitly tied the custody petition to business concessions, suggesting that Westridge could help persuade you to be more reasonable about both matters if they reinstated him on the project. That's practically extortion, I observed, still amazed by Greg's recklessness. It certainly demonstrates an alarming willingness to use his children as bargaining chips, Joseph agreed. Melissa believes this evidence, combined with the original, divorce circumstances, creates a nearly insurmountable obstacle to his custody petition. In fact, she's preparing a counter-motion to limit his visitation to supervised sessions only, given the demonstrated pattern of putting his interests above the children's welfare. 2 days later, I was admitted to the hospital when my blood pressure spiked dangerously despite medication. We can't wait any longer, Dr. Morgan explained as nurses prepared me for surgery. The safest option for you and the twins is to deliver now. As they wheeled me toward the operating room, a strange calm settled over me. After all the uncertainty, the betrayal, the legal battles and corporate maneuvering, this moment, meeting my daughters, was all that mattered. Rachel, dressed in surgical scrubs, held my hand throughout the procedure, her presence a steady comfort as Dr. Morgan worked behind the blue drape. A lot of pressure now, the doctor warned, and then, miraculously, the sound of a cry filled the operating room, strong, indignant, full of life. Baby A is here, Dr. Morgan announced. She looks perfect. Moments later, a second cry joined, the first as my younger daughter made her entrance into the world. Do they have names? A nurse asked, as the tiny red-faced infants were briefly placed on my chest before being taken for assessment. Through tears of joy, I nodded. Sophia. Eleanor and Clare Thomas, I said, honoring both my mother and father in my daughter's names. Rachel squeezed my hand, tears in her own eyes. They're beautiful, Natalie. Absolutely perfect. The next few hours passed in a blur of medical checks, first feeding attempts, and overwhelming emotion. By evening, I was settled in a recovery room with both twins sleeping peacefully in bassinets beside my bed. As I watched their tiny chests rise and fall, their delicate fingers occasionally twitching in sleep, I was filled with a love so fierce and protective it almost hurt. A lioness, watching over her cubs, prepared to defend them against any threat. Joseph visited the following morning, bringing flowers and news. Greg's attorney contacted Melissa last night, he said after admiring the twins. They're withdrawing the custody petition and reverting to the original visitation arrangement from the divorce settlement. The relief I felt was immense. What changed his mind? I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. Apparently, Westridge not only removed him from the Collins Tower project, but terminated his employment entirely after documenting his attempt to use corporate pressure for personal gain, Joseph explained. The evidence was too compelling to fight. Without Westridge's financial backing, Greg can't afford a prolonged legal battle over custody, especially one he's almost certain to lose. As Joseph prepared to leave, he paused at the door. Your father would be so proud of you, Natalie. Not just of these beautiful granddaughters, but of the woman you've become through all of this. I smiled through fresh tears. I think he knew who I could be all along, even when I didn't see it myself. Later that day, as I dozed between feedings, a nurse gently woke me. There's someone asking to see you, she said. He says he's the twins' father, but he's not on the approved visitor list. I hesitated, torn between the desire to shield my daughters from Greg's manipulations and the recognition that, despite everything, he was their father. It's okay, I finally decided. He can come in. Greg entered cautiously, his normally confident stride replaced by an almost tentative approach. His eyes went immediately to the bassinets where Sophia and Clare slept, swaddled in the pink and purple blankets Rachel had brought. They're so small, he whispered, an unexpected emotion thickening his voice. Would you like to see them? I offered, surprising myself with the generosity. He nodded wordlessly, moving closer to the bassinets. This is Sophia, I said, indicating the slightly larger twin with a dusting of dark hair like mine. And this is Clare. Greg stared at his daughters, something shifting in his expression. Wonder, perhaps, or regret. I withdraw the custody. Petition, he said after a long moment, still looking at the twins rather than at me. It was a mistake. Another mistake in a long line of them. I studied his face, searching for the manipulation I'd come to expect, but finding what appeared to be genuine remorse. Why are you here, Greg? I asked quietly. Why are you here, Greg? I asked quietly. He finally looked up from the twins, meeting my eyes for the first time since entering the room. The polished confidence that had once drawn me to him was gone, replaced by something I'd never seen in him before, genuine uncertainty. I wanted to see them, he said simply, and to tell you in person that I'm withdrawing the custody petition, not because of Westridge or the job, though yes, I've been terminated, but because seeing them. He gestured toward the bassinets. This makes it real in a way it wasn't before. I waited, giving him space to continue. Greg had always filled silences, uncomfortable with any conversation he couldn't control. I'm not ready to be a father, he admitted after a long moment. I thought I was when we were trying to get pregnant. It seemed like the next logical step in building the perfect life. But when you told me it had actually happened, he shook his head. I panicked. Everything suddenly felt too real, too permanent, too restricting. They are real, I said, protective instinct flaring. They're not theoretical concepts, or status symbols or career complications. They're two little girls who will grow up knowing exactly who wanted them and who didn't. Greg flinched at the harshness of my words. I deserve that, he acknowledged. I handled everything terribly. The pregnancy, the divorce, the custody petition, all of it. I keep making things worse, hurting people I never intended to hurt. What do you want now, Greg? I asked, too emotionally and physically exhausted for extended conversation. You've seen them. You've withdrawn the petition. Why are you really here? He hesitated, then said, I don't know if I can be the father they deserve, but I don't want to be the father who abandoned them either. I thought maybe, with time, I could learn how to be present in their lives in some meaningful way. His uncertainty was so at odds with the Greg I had known, the man who always had a plan, an angle, a carefully crafted approach to getting exactly what he wanted. This vulnerability seemed genuine, and that made it more difficult to dismiss. I can't make that decision right now, I told him honestly. I've just had major surgery. I'm adjusting to twins. I need to focus on them and my recovery without the emotional complications of figuring out what role you might play in their lives. Greg nodded, accepting the boundary. That's fair. When you're ready, if you're ever ready, to discuss visitation beyond what's in the settlement, I'd like the chance to talk about it. He looked once more at the sleeping twins. They're beautiful, Natalie. They look like you. After he left, I lay back against the pillows, emotions swirling. Greg's visit had been unexpected in more ways than one. The man who had coldly informed me of his desire for divorce, who had calculated the timing of his abandonment for maximum professional advantage, who had attempted to use our unborn daughters as leverage in business negotiations, that man had seemed absent today, replaced by someone showing the first glimmers of self-awareness. Whether it would last, whether it was genuine, remained to be seen. But my focus couldn't be on Greg's journey of self-discovery. My daughters needed me present and whole, not distracted by their father's emotional evolution or lack thereof. The twins and I were discharged from the hospital 5 days later. Rachel had prepared the apartment, stocking the refrigerator with easy meals and setting up a temporary sleeping area in the living room, so I wouldn't have to navigate stairs while recovering from the C-section. Joseph had arranged for a postpartum doula to help during the day, allowing Rachel to maintain her work schedule while ensuring I had the support I needed. Those first weeks passed in a blur of feedings, diaper changes, and stolen moments of sleep. The twins established different rhythms almost immediately. Sophia was the more vocal, demanding attention with lusty cries whenever her needs weren't promptly met, while Clare observed the world with quiet intensity, her dark eyes seeming to absorb everything around her. Despite the exhaustion, despite the physical discomfort of recovery, I had never been happier. Each tiny milestone, the first time they tracked my face with their eyes, the first intentional grasp of my finger, the first hint of what might become a smile, filled me with a joy so profound it seemed to expand my heart. 6 weeks after the birth, I had my postpartum checkup with Dr. Morgan, who pronounced me healed and healthy. Blood pressure's completely normal, she noted with satisfaction. How are you feeling otherwise? Adjusting to twins is no small feat. Exhausted, but good, I replied honestly. They're starting to sleep for slightly longer stretches at night, which helps. She nodded sympathetically. And emotionally? Any signs of postpartum depression or anxiety? I considered the question carefully. I have moments of feeling overwhelmed, but they pass. Mostly, I just feel capable. More capable than I expected, actually. Dr. Morgan smiled at this. That doesn't surprise me. You've handled more in the past 9 months than many people face in years. Twins after that will seem almost manageable by comparison. On my way home from the appointment, I received a text from an unknown number. Hi, Natalie, it's Cameron. Westridge, hope you and the twins are doing well. When you're ready, I'd like to discuss a potential opportunity with the Campbell Foundation. No rush. Enjoy these precious early weeks. The message was unexpected, but not unwelcome. I had developed a genuine respect for Cameron during our brief professional interactions, appreciating his integrity and straightforward approach. I waited until the twins were napping that afternoon before calling him back. "Natalie, thank you for returning my call," he greeted me warmly. "How are your daughters?" The sincerity in his question touched me. So many people asked about the babies as a social formality rather than out of genuine interest. "They're wonderful," I replied, "growing too quickly and keeping me thoroughly sleep-deprived, but absolutely worth it." "That never changes, by the way," he said with a chuckle. "My youngest is 17, and I still find myself watching her sleep sometimes, amazed that this remarkable person exists." His words created an immediate connection, parent to parent, rather than business associate to business associate. "You mentioned an opportunity with the foundation?" I prompted gently. "Yes, though please tell me if the timing is too soon," he began. "Westridge Development has established a college scholarship program for children of construction workers. We've been looking for a partner organization to help manage the selection process and disbursement. The Campbell Foundation seemed an ideal fit, given your focus on education and your connection to the construction industry." The proposal was intriguing, a natural extension of the foundation's existing work while creating positive connections between Campbell Materials and the workers who used our products. "I'd be very interested in discussing this further," I told him. "Would you be open to a meeting at my apartment in the next couple of weeks? With newborn twins, getting out for meetings is still a bit challenging." "Of course," Cameron agreed. "Immediately. I remember those days well. I'm happy to come to you whenever is convenient." We scheduled a tentative date for the following week, with the understanding that baby schedules were unpredictable and might necessitate rescheduling. After ending the call, I sat in the quiet apartment, listening to the soft sounds of my daughters, sleeping in the next room, and felt a surge of gratitude for how my life had unfolded. 6 months ago, I had been devastated by Greg's betrayal, terrified of facing pregnancy and motherhood alone. Now, I was not only managing, but thriving, rebuilding my professional identity, forming meaningful new connections, and discovering strengths I hadn't known I possessed. The day of my meeting with Cameron arrived, bringing unexpected nervousness. It would be my first professional interaction since the twins' birth, and part of me worried that motherhood had somehow diminished my business acumen. Rachel helped me prepare, offering to take the twins for a walk in their stroller if they became fussy during the meeting. I needn't have worried. Cameron arrived precisely on time, bringing a thoughtful gift of 2 children's books rather than the typical flowers or wine. When Clare began to fuss halfway through our discussion of the scholarship parameters, he paused naturally, waiting with perfect patience while I settled her. "My wife used to conduct entire business calls while nursing our son," he commented. Women's ability to multitask never ceases to amaze me. By the end of our 2-hour meeting, we had outlined a framework for collaboration between the Campbell Foundation and Westridge's scholarship initiative. The program would provide full college tuition for 5 students annually, with preference given to those pursuing degrees in construction management, engineering, healthcare, or education, fields that directly benefited the communities where both companies operated. "I think your father would approve of this partnership," Cameron observed as he prepared to leave. He always had a reputation for investing in people, not just properties or materials. The comment sparked my curiosity. "Did you know my father personally?" I asked, realizing I'd never considered the possibility. Cameron nodded. "Not well, but we served on several industry committees together. He was quiet in large groups but formidable one-on-one. He could see through posturing faster than anyone I've ever met." This description aligned perfectly with the father I had known: observant, insightful, judging people by their actions rather than their words. That ability served him well in business, I agreed, and apparently in assessing my ex-husband too. Cameron's expression grew serious. If you don't mind my asking, have you had any further issues with Gregory since the withdrawal of his custody petition? No, I said, grateful for the peace of recent weeks. He sends occasional texts asking about the twins, but he hasn't attempted to visit again since the hospital. Cameron nodded thoughtfully. That's probably for the best, at least for now. Genuine change takes time and usually requires professional support, neither of which he seems to have embraced yet. After Cameron left, I sat with Sophia and Clare during their tummy time, watching their determined efforts to lift their heads, and reflected on the strange path that had led me here. Had Greg not betrayed me? Had my father not created the contingency plan? Had Cameron not recognized Greg's manipulation attempts? How different would my life be now? Would I have remained? The diminished version of myself that Greg had carefully cultivated, never discovering my capacity for independence and leadership? The twins were 3 months old when Martin Reynolds approached me about taking a more active role in Campbell Building Materials beyond the foundation work. The quarterly board meeting is next month, he explained during one of his regular visits to update me on company operations. Several members have expressed interest in having you attend, perhaps even consider joining the board officially. The prospect was both exciting and intimidating. I don't have a business background, I reminded him. My expertise is in nursing, not construction materials or corporate governance. Martin smiled, reminding me suddenly of my father. Neither did Thomas when he started the company. He was a carpenter who recognized a need and filled it. He built his knowledge as he built the business. That's different, I protested. He founded the company. I just inherited a controlling interest. Martin's expression grew serious. Natalie, ownership without engagement is just passive investment. Your father didn't build Campbell Materials to be a dividend check for his descendants. He built it to serve the community while providing good jobs and quality products. He would have wanted you involved, not just as a beneficiary, but as a steward. His words resonated deeply. Dad had often spoken about responsibility, about how privilege without purpose was empty, how true fulfillment came from contributing rather than consuming. I'll think about it, I promised, but I'd want to attend a few meetings as an observer before considering a board position. That's a perfectly reasonable approach, Martin approved. The next meeting is April 15th. We can arrange for someone to watch the twins here at your apartment so you can participate via video conference if that's easier than bringing them to the office. The board meeting proved less intimidating than I had anticipated. Most of the members had known my father well and welcomed my participation with genuine warmth. They patiently explained unfamiliar terminology and provided context for ongoing projects and challenges. By the end of the 4-hour session, I found myself genuinely interested in the company's operations and strategic direction. "You're a natural," Joseph commented afterward when he called to check my impressions of the meeting. "You asked insightful questions and didn't pretend to know things you didn't. That earned you respect right away." His encouragement bolstered my confidence. "I think I'd like to attend regularly," I decided. "Not ready for an official board position yet, but definitely want to learn more." As spring turned to summer, the twins grew more interactive and distinct in their personalities. Sophia remained the more assertive of the two, reaching all the physical milestones slightly ahead of her sister. Rolling over first, sitting unassisted earlier, grabbing for toys with determined concentration. Clare, though slightly behind, in motor skills, seemed more attuned to emotional nuances, responding to changes in voice tone and facial expressions with remarkable sensitivity. Their 4th month brought another message from Greg, this one more substantial than his previous check-ins. "Natalie, I've been seeing a therapist for the past 2 months. It's helping me understand the choices I made and why. I'd like to meet with you to discuss establishing some limited visitation with the girls, if you're open to that. No pressure, just a conversation." I stared at the message for a long time, conflicting emotions warring within me. Part of me wanted to protect my daughters from any potential disappointment or rejection if Greg's interest proved fleeting. Another part recognized that they deserved the opportunity to know their father if he was genuinely committed to being in their lives consistently. After discussing it with Rachel and Joseph, both of whom counseled caution but not outright refusal, I agreed to meet Greg for coffee at a cafe near my apartment. The location offered both convenience for me and the neutrality of a public space, where the conversation was less likely to become heated. Greg arrived precisely on time, another change from his previous behavior when he had often kept me waiting, a subtle assertion of his time being more valuable than mine. His appearance had changed subtly, the designer suits replaced by more casual attire, his formerly perfect haircut slightly grown out. But the most noticeable difference was in his demeanor, the cocky self-assurance replaced by a quiet thoughtfulness. "Thank you for meeting me," he began after we had ordered. "How are the twins?" I showed him recent photos on my phone, Sophia mid-laugh during a bath, Clare focused intently on a colorful toy. "They're thriving," I said simply, growing quickly and developing their own very distinct personalities. He studied the photos with genuine interest. "They look happy. You're clearly doing an amazing job with them." The compliment seemed sincere, without the underlying manipulation that had characterized so many of his previous interactions. "I'm trying," I acknowledged. "Some days are easier than others, but they're worth every challenge." After a moment of silence, Greg said, "I've been doing a lot of thinking since they were born. A lot of therapy, too. I'm starting to understand why I reacted the way I did to the pregnancy, to everything, really." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "When you told me you were pregnant, all I could see was the end of my freedom, the closing of doors. I panicked and made the worst possible choice." "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, neither accepting nor rejecting his explanation. "Because I want you to know that my request for visitation isn't about control or image or getting something from you," he replied. "It's about taking responsibility, late and inadequate as that may be. I don't expect forgiveness or trust. Those have to be earned over time if they can be earned at all. But I do want the chance to be some kind of father to Sophia and Clare." His words sounded rehearsed but not in the calculating way of the old Greg. Rather, they had the quality of something thought about deeply, perhaps discussed in therapy sessions. Points he wanted to convey accurately without his usual tendency to manipulate the conversation toward his preferred outcome. "What kind of visitation are you proposing?" I asked, still cautious but willing to listen. "Something very limited to start," he said. "Maybe an hour every couple of weeks at your apartment with you present. Just a chance to get to know them a little, to establish some kind of connection." The request was modest, acknowledging both his status as a virtual stranger to the twins and my legitimate concerns about his consistency and commitment. "I'll consider it," I told him. "But I need to be clear about my expectations. This can't be something you start and then drop when it becomes inconvenient, or when you start dating someone who isn't interested in children. These are little humans, forming attachments and understandings of the world, not hobbies you can pick up and put down." Greg nodded, accepting the challenge in my words. "That's fair. I understand your skepticism completely. I've given you every reason to doubt me. All I can say is that I'm committed to doing better, to being better, not just for the twins, but for myself too." As I walked home from the cafe, I reflected on the meeting. The Greg I had just spoken with seemed genuinely changed from the man who had coolly informed me of his desire for divorce 8 months earlier. Whether that change was temporary or permanent, surface level or profound, remained to be seen. But I had to make decisions based on the information available to me now, not on fears of what might happen or lingering anger about what had already occurred. After much consideration, I agreed to Greg's proposal. 1-hour visits, twice monthly, at my apartment with me present throughout. Our first session was awkward, but not disastrous. Greg brought age-appropriate toys for both girls and seemed genuinely interested in learning their routines and preferences. The twins, still too young to be wary of strangers, accepted his attention with their typical responses. Sophia grabbing enthusiastically at the colorful rattle he offered, Claire studying his face with serious concentration before offering a hesitant smile. Over the next several months, these visits became a regular part of our schedule. Greg maintained perfect consistency, never canceling or arriving late, always respectful of the boundaries I had established. He asked thoughtful questions about the twins' development, took genuine interest in their emerging personalities, and never once mentioned business or attempted to discuss anything related to Campbell Materials or Westridge development. Gradually, I found myself relaxing during these visits, not quite trusting Greg completely, but acknowledging the effort he was making. When the twins were 8 months old, their pediatrician noticed that Claire seemed to have some mild delays in her gross motor development. "It's not necessarily concerning at this point," Dr. Chen explained during their checkup, "but I'd like to refer her for an evaluation by a developmental specialist, just to be thorough." The recommendation triggered immediate anxiety. I called Rachel first, then Joseph, seeking reassurance and advice. Both were supportive, but neither could fully alleviate my worry. When Greg arrived for his scheduled visit the following day, he immediately sensed something was wrong. "What is it?" he asked, genuine concern in his voice. "Has something happened?" I hesitated, unsure whether to share this vulnerability with him, then decided that if he was going to be part of the twins' lives, he needed to be informed about important developments. "Dr. Chen thinks Claire might have some developmental delays," I explained, keeping my voice steady despite the worry gnawing at me. "She's referring us to a specialist for evaluation." Greg's response surprised me. Instead of minimizing the concern or offering empty reassurances, he sat down and asked practical questions. What specifically had the doctor noticed? When was the evaluation scheduled? What might the potential outcomes or interventions be? His approach was thoughtful and focused on understanding rather than dismissing. "My nephew had some early developmental delays," he shared after I had explained everything I knew. "My sister found an excellent physical therapist who specialized in infants. I'd be happy to get her contact information for you, if that would be helpful." The offer was practical, specific, and without any hint of trying to take control of the situation. Just a simple extension of potentially useful resources. "Thank you," I said, genuinely appreciative. "That would be very helpful." Greg nodded, then asked, "Would you like me to accompany you to the evaluation? Not to interfere or make decisions, just to be another set of ears. Medical appointments can be overwhelming, especially when you're worried." The offer caught me off guard. It was the first time Greg had suggested any involvement beyond the carefully structured visitation we had established. My instinct was to refuse, to maintain the boundaries that had provided safety and predictability. But another part of me recognized that his presence might indeed be helpful, and that allowing him this involvement could be a step toward the more meaningful co-parenting relationship the twins might benefit from long term. "I'll think about it," I said finally. "The appointment isn't for another 2 weeks." Greg accepted this without pushing, turning his attention to Sophia, who was eagerly showing him her newest skill of clapping hands. That evening, after the twins were asleep, I called Rachel to discuss Greg's offer. "What do you think his motivation is?" she asked, her natural protectiveness toward me evident in her tone. "I'm not sure," I admitted. "He seemed genuinely concerned, and it would be helpful to have another adult there, someone who knows Claire." and can help process whatever information we receive. You could ask me or Joseph to go with you, Rachel pointed out gently. True, I acknowledged, but they're his daughters too. If he's making a genuine effort to be involved in a positive way, shouldn't I encourage that rather than push him away? Rachel was quiet for a moment. You know him better than anyone, Nat. If you think his offer comes from a good place, then maybe it's worth accepting. Just remember that you're still in control here. You set the boundaries and expectations. After careful consideration, I decided to accept Greg's offer. I texted him the details of Claire's appointment, making it clear that his role would be supportive rather than decision-making. His response was prompt and appropriate. Thank you for allowing me to be there. I understand my role is to support you and Claire, not to take over or direct the process. The specialist's evaluation was thorough, but not alarming. Dr. Winters, a developmental pediatrician with a warm manner and clear communication style, observed Claire's movements, conducted several assessment activities, and reviewed her health history. Claire has what we call mild hypotonia, low muscle tone, she explained after completing the evaluation. It's making certain movements more challenging for her, which explains the delays in sitting unassisted and crawling. Is it serious? I asked, feeling Greg's supportive presence beside me as we both absorbed this information. It's certainly something we want to address, Dr. Winters replied, but it's quite manageable with the right therapy. I'm recommending twice-weekly sessions with a pediatric physical therapist to help strengthen her muscles and develop her motor skills. With consistent therapy, most children with mild hypotonia catch up to their peers by age 2 or 3. The diagnosis was both a relief, nothing severe or degenerative, and a new concern to manage. As we left the appointment, Greg said quietly, "You handled that incredibly well. You asked all the right questions and really advocated for Claire." The compliment touched me unexpectedly. "Thank you for being there," I replied. It helped, having someone else listening and processing everything. He nodded, then said, "I meant what I said about my sister's physical therapist. She works with a practice that specializes in infant developmental issues. Would you like me to contact her?" The offer was practical and specific, exactly what I needed in that moment, rather than vague expressions of concern or empty reassurances. "Yes, please," I said. "And perhaps you'd like to attend one of Claire's therapy sessions once we get them scheduled. It would be good for you to understand the exercises so you can support her appropriately during your visits." The invitation represented a significant expansion of his involvement, a small but meaningful vote of confidence in his commitment to being present for our daughters. Greg's expression reflected surprise followed by genuine appreciation. "I'd like that very much," he said simply. "Thank you for trusting me with this." His response confirmed what I had begun to suspect over the months of consistent visits, that the change in him was authentic, not strategic. The man standing before me was not the same one who had walked out upon learning of my pregnancy. This Greg was humbler, more thoughtful, capable of considering others' needs before his own ambitions. As we walked to our separate cars, Greg asked hesitantly, "Would it be all right if I increased my visits somewhat? Maybe to once a week instead of twice a month? I know the girls are getting to an age where consistency and familiarity are important." The request was reasonable, especially given his perfect attendance record thus far. "We can try that," I agreed. "Let's start next week." That night, as I watched my daughters sleeping peacefully in their cribs, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. The betrayal that had seemed like the end of everything had instead been the beginning of a different, unexpectedly fulfilling life. The trust fund my father had established, the financial protection that had given me the strength to stand firm when Greg abandoned me, had served its purpose. But the greatest inheritance from my father wasn't monetary. It was the confidence he had always had in me, the belief that I was capable of more than I realized, the certainty that I would find my way through whatever challenges life presented. Clare's physical therapy began the following week. 2 45-minute sessions with an experienced therapist named Elaine, who had come highly recommended by Greg's sister. The exercises seemed simple, but were specifically designed to strengthen Clare's core muscles and improve her coordination. Elaine showed me how to continue the activities at home between sessions, emphasizing the importance of consistency. Greg attended the second therapy appointment as we had discussed. He watched attentively, asked thoughtful questions, and took notes about the home exercises. "I can work on these with her during my visits," he offered. It would give us something structured to do together, and more importantly, help her progress. His focus on Clare's needs rather than his own convenience demonstrated another step in his ongoing transformation. As summer turned to fall, both twins continued to develop their distinct personalities and abilities. Sophia remained ahead on physical milestones, pulling herself up to standing position and cruising along furniture with confident determination. Clare, while still working hard on her motor skills with noticeable improvement from therapy, showed remarkable language development, babbling with increasingly speech-like patterns and responding to verbal cues with impressive comprehension. Greg's weekly visits became a comfortable part of our routine. He arrived at the same time each Saturday morning, always prepared with age-appropriate activities and always respectful of the boundaries I had established. Gradually, I found myself relaxing the requirement that I be present in the room throughout his time with the twins. I began using portions of his visits to shower uninterrupted, prepare meals, or simply enjoy a cup of tea in peaceful solitude, small luxuries for a mother of twins. As the girls approached their first birthday, I found myself reflecting on all that had changed in 15 months. The woman who had sat shattered on her kitchen floor, divorce papers mocking her from the counter, pregnancy test still showing positive, had transformed into someone stronger, more confident, more complete than she had ever been during her marriage. The twins who had once been a terrifying prospect to face alone were now the center of a rich, fulfilling life surrounded by genuine support and love. Even Greg had evolved from the calculating, self-centered man who had walked out upon learning of my pregnancy into someone capable of genuine connection and consistent commitment. While our relationship remained firmly co-parenting rather than friendship, there was a growing mutual respect that benefited our daughters. The trust fund that had changed everything, my father's final, prescient gift, had served its purpose beyond financial security. It had given me the strength to stand firm when I was most vulnerable, the leverage to secure a future for my daughters free from manipulation and power games, and most importantly, the time and space to discover who I truly was apart from the roles of wife and mother. As I prepared for the twins' first birthday celebration, a small gathering with Rachel, Joseph, Martin, and yes, Greg in attendance, I thought about what I would tell my daughters someday when they asked about their early history. I would tell them about their grandfather Thomas, who had seen clearly what others missed, who had planned for their security before they were even conceived. I would tell them about their father Greg, who had made grave mistakes but found the courage to change, to become someone worthy of knowing them. And I would tell them about their mother, a woman who discovered that her greatest strength emerged not despite life's challenges, but because of them. The woman I had become through this journey of betrayal and rebirth was not defined by what had been done to her, but by how she had responded, with dignity, with resilience, and ultimately with the grace to allow healing where possible while never compromising her own worth. That was the true inheritance I hoped to pass to my daughters. Not financial protection or business interests, but the unshakable understanding that they were inherently valuable, infinitely capable, and worthy of relationships that honored rather than diminished their light. As I placed the final decorations for their birthday celebration, Sophia and Clare watched from their playmat, occasionally clapping or babbling their approval. Whatever lay ahead, Clare's ongoing therapy, my expanding role at Campbell Materials, The evolving co-parenting relationship with Greg. I faced it now with confidence rather than fear, with hope rather than resignation. The trust fund had changed Greg's plans, but more importantly, it had changed mine, transforming a path of dependence and compromise into one of autonomy and strength, creating space for me to become not who someone else needed me to be, but who I was truly meant to be all along. The twins' second birthday marked a milestone that seemed nearly impossible when I first learned I was pregnant. Watching Sophia fearlessly climb the playground equipment while Clare meticulously arranged blocks nearby, I marveled at how distinctly their personalities had developed. The celebration was small but joyful. Rachel, Joseph, Martin and his wife, and Greg, who had continued his alternate weekend visits with unwavering consistency since moving to Portland. After the cake had been demolished and presents opened, Greg helped me clean up while the twins napped, exhausted from the excitement. "I've been offered a position back in Seattle," he said, carefully folding the birthday banner. "Senior Marketing Director for a sustainable construction firm. They're expanding operations here." The news caught me by surprise. "You're considering moving back?" For 18 months, our co-parenting arrangement had functioned smoothly across distance. His weekend visits predictable, video calls regular. Our interactions focused entirely on the twins' well-being. "I miss too many moments," he explained. "Weekly video calls aren't the same as being present for first words or new skills." His eyes reflected genuine regret rather than calculation. "But I wanted to discuss it with you before accepting. I don't want to disrupt the balance we've created." His consideration, putting our co-parenting relationship before career decisions, confirmed how profoundly he'd changed from the man who had walked out upon learning of my pregnancy. "I think more frequent, consistent contact would benefit the girls," I acknowledged, "as long as we maintain clear boundaries and expectations." With Greg's return to Seattle, our parenting schedule evolved naturally. Weekly evening visits expanded to include occasional dinners where we both participated, creating a sense of family connection without romantic expectations. The twins thrived under this arrangement, secure in the knowledge that both parents were reliably present in their lives. On the twins' third birthday, I made a decision that had been gradually forming for months. "I'm returning to nursing part-time," I announced to Joseph during one of his regular visits. "The Children's Hospital is creating a liaison position between their pediatric department and community organizations. I'll be working 3 days a week while the girls are in preschool." Joseph's smile held genuine pleasure. "Thomas would be enormously proud," he said. "He always admired your dedication to nursing. Even when he created the trust protections, he hoped they would give you choices rather than defining your path." My father's trust had indeed provided choices when they were most needed. The financial security had given me leverage during the divorce, allowing me to negotiate from strength rather than vulnerability. But its true value had emerged in the space it created for personal evolution, the opportunity to rediscover my professional identity while establishing motherhood on my own terms. Campbell Materials remained an important part of my life. The foundation work had expanded under my direction, creating scholarship programs and healthcare initiatives that honored my father's legacy of community investment. I attended quarterly board meetings and provided strategic input on major decisions, but never felt pressured to take a more operational role. The company respected my choice to balance corporate responsibilities with both motherhood and my renewed nursing career. Greg continued his own evolution, consistently demonstrating that his commitment to fatherhood wasn't temporary or conditional. When Clare developed pneumonia shortly after her third birthday, he rearranged his work schedule without hesitation, alternating hospital shifts with me during her 4-day stay. "Whatever she needs," he said simply when I expressed gratitude for his flexibility. "That's all that matters." As the twins approached their 4th birthday, I found myself reflecting on the remarkable journey we had traveled. The trust fund that had initially seemed like financial protection had ultimately facilitated something far more valuable: the discovery of my own strength, the creation of a balanced co-parenting relationship from the ashes of a failed marriage, and the opportunity to pursue professional fulfillment while prioritizing motherhood. My father had somehow anticipated this outcome, planning not just for my financial security, but for the personal growth that would follow. "Keep something of your own," he had advised me before his illness, words I had dismissed until life forced me to understand their importance. The trust wasn't just money, it was independence, options, self-determination. Exactly what I needed when everything else seemed to be collapsing around me. Greg had changed too, evolving from the self-centered man who walked away when pregnancy threatened his career ambitions into someone capable of genuine commitment and consideration. While our relationship remained firmly co-parenting rather than friendship, there was mutual respect that benefited our daughters immeasurably. Most importantly, Sophia and Clare were thriving, confident, secure, loved unconditionally by both parents and the extended family we had created around them. They didn't experience the tension or animosity that often accompanies divorce. Instead, they witnessed adults who communicated respectfully, prioritized their needs, and maintained consistent boundaries. "Daddy says we're having a picnic on Saturday," Sophia announced one evening as I tucked her into bed. "He said we can bring strawberries because they're your favorite too." Her words captured the essence of what we had managed to create: a family structure where parents considered each other's preferences even in small matters, where children felt secure in the knowledge that both parents were committed to their happiness. The following day, I received an unexpected letter from Cameron Westridge. His company had maintained connections with Campbell Materials long after Greg's departure, our professional relationship evolving into mutual respect and occasional collaboration on community projects. The letter contained news that brought a sense of completion to our story. Westridge Development had acquired the troubled Collins Tower project, the very project that had precipitated Greg's abandonment. "We've completely reimagined the development," Cameron wrote, converting half the planned office space to affordable housing and incorporating sustainable design elements throughout. The Campbell Foundation's input on community needs has been invaluable in this transition. The irony wasn't lost on me. The project that Greg had once prioritized over his marriage and unborn children had ultimately been transformed into something that aligned with values he only discovered after losing everything he thought he wanted. Sometimes life's harshest lessons create the most profound transformations. As I prepared for the twins' 4th birthday celebration, a backyard party with friends from preschool, our trusted circle of adults who had supported us from the beginning, and yes, Greg, who would help with games and cake, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought us here. The trust fund had changed Greg's plans, derailing his calculated exit from our marriage with unexpected consequences. But its greatest gift wasn't financial security or even the leverage it provided during divorce negotiations. Its true value lay in creating the foundation upon which all of us, Greg, me, and most importantly our daughters, could build something better than the marriage that had broken. A family defined not by legal bonds, but by genuine care, consistent presence, and the conscious choice to prioritize our children's well-being above old hurts or personal convenience. Sometimes, I realized, the end of what we thought we wanted creates space for what we truly need, not just to survive, but to flourish in ways we never imagined possible. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.